Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the problem of the day. Like normal, be sure to answer the questions that I ask out loud and think about how your work is the same or different from what we talk about together. Remember, there are lots of ways that we can represent and solve story problems. Whatever way you represented, what does your representation need to show? Say it out loud. Yeah, so it's got to show 62,409, right, is the total, because that was the total amount of potatoes in all that he sold. And then that amount, it's made up of three parts, right? We've got, so this is our total. Great. So we've got our Monday part, and that's 24,196 for Monday. We've got our Tuesday part of 18,023. Right? And then I'm going to put a W for our Wednesday part, because that is the amount that we don't know yet and need to figure out. Okay, so what's the big question in this problem, and how do you know? Say it out loud. Yeah, how many potatoes were sold on Wednesday? That's what the question is asking us, or the story problem is asking us to figure out. Okay, so what would the little question be, and how do you know that? Say it out loud. Right, the little question is how many potatoes were sold on Monday and Tuesday combined. We have to know that first so that we can then subtract it from the total to figure out how many were sold on Wednesday. Sweet. So this isn't our first rodeo with two-step story problems, right? We know that we always ask ourselves, what is the big question? And what little questions do I need to figure out first? So we talked about a representation that included both the big and the little questions. But some kids that I had last year, they like to separate those two things out into two representations like this. So my question is, does this representation, or these two representations, also correctly represent the problem? How do you know? Say it out loud. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Right? It still shows the big question of how many potatoes were sold on Wednesday. And it also represents the little question of how many potatoes were sold together on Monday and Tuesday. You know that comes up here, and you could take your total minus the amount sold on Monday and Tuesday, and boom, that tells you how many on Wednesday. Okay, so as you are solving multi-step problems today, remember you can create either one representation or two separate ones, as long as the big question and the smaller questions are represented either way you go. So earlier this year, we did talk about estimating before solving story problems. And I'm wondering, why might it make sense to estimate before we actually dig in to solve this problem? Say it out loud. Yeah, it helps to make sure that the answers that we get when we solve make sense and are reasonable. So in this case, where we have these numbers here that we're working with, how could we estimate? What would we probably want to round our numbers to? Say it out loud. Right. It would make sense to round today to the nearest 10,000, because as you look at the three numbers that were given, the largest place value they all have in common is the 10,000th place. Well, okay, so if we do that, why would we round to the 10,000, and why not just round them to like the nearest 10 or the nearest 100. Why would we want to do that? Go ahead and say it out loud. Yeah, if we do that, it's not actually going to make the numbers much easier to work with, is it? We want to round to the largest place value they have in common so that we get both a good estimate, but also numbers that are easy to work with so that our estimate can happen quickly. Okay, and do you think it makes more sense to do that rounding and estimating before we solve the problem or after, and why? Say it out loud. Yeah, so generally we're going to round and use the rounded numbers to estimate first before we solve with the actual numbers. And that way, when we solve with the actual numbers, we have our estimate to check and see if our answer makes sense. So I know at this point in the year, some of you might be comfortable estimating with mental math by thinking about what 10,000 each number is closest to, and that is great. And if you're still using a number line to support your estimation, that's great too. So to help us in the introduction, I made these number lines that we would need to help us with our estimating. I also captured the 2 key points we just talked about. Read them with me. Go ahead. Round to the largest place value all numbers have in common, and use rounded numbers to estimate before solving with actual numbers. All right, let's use these number lines to help us round real quick. So 62,409. What is that going to be closest to? 60,000 or 70,000? Say it out loud. Yeah, 60,000, right? Because 62,409 would go about there on the number line, and that is closest to 60,000. Okay. And what about 24,196? What's that going to be closer to? 20,000 or 30,000? Say it out loud. Yep, 20,000. 24,196 comes right before the midpoint of 25,000, so it will also round down to 20,000 in this case. And then what about 18,023? Is that going to be closer to 10,000 or 20,000? Say it out loud. Yeah, 20,000. 18,023 would be past the 15,000 halfway mark. Okay, great. So now that I've got these rounded numbers, how would I use them to estimate the answer to the story problem? Say it out loud. Right, so first I would use them to estimate the answer to my little question, or how many potatoes were sold on Monday and Tuesday. So our estimates here were 20,000, that's the Monday potatoes, plus 20,000 for the Tuesday potatoes. That gives me 40,000. And then I would subtract that estimate from the estimated total to get an estimate for how many were sold on Wednesday. So 60,000 minus 40,000. That means my estimate is about 20,000 potatoes were sold on Wednesday. Okay, so now let's go ahead and solve the actual problem. And how would I want to solve this again? Say it out loud. Right. First, I need to find out how many potatoes were sold on Monday and Tuesday together. So I'm going to just use our standard algorithm. 6 and 3, 9. 9 and 2 is 11. 2, 12, 1. Great, 42,219. And then I'm going to take my total, 62,409, and I will subtract 42,218. Okay, so I got 20,190 potatoes on Wednesday. So let's think about if this answer is reasonable based on my estimate. Our estimate was 20,000. So do you think this is a reasonable answer to the problem? Why or why not? Say it out loud. Yeah, that is reasonable, isn't it? So we could say that 20,190 is pretty close to our estimate of 20,000. So the answer is reasonable.